Hey guys, welcome back to the Persistence Outdoors podcast. The last couple weeks, we've been talking about rain gear, and this week I want to continue the water theme and talk about water treatment systems. You know, water is so important when you're hunting, and especially when you're backpack hunting. One of the things I've noticed more and more is that water and hydration really affects my energy and endurance. And that sounds obvious, right? But what I've been noticing is that if I go out and hunt for, say, half a day, but I go into it dehydrated or I don't drink much water when I'm out there, when I get back, I feel like I've got to take a giant nap. I actually call it a death nap. It's like I'm just out. I die and I come back to life. But on the other hand, if I stay hydrated and drink enough water while I'm out there, I might feel tired when I get back, but I don't feel like I just have to knock out. I kind of extrapolate that when I think about multiple days of hunting, right? So if I'm hunting for more than one day in a row, I really want to stay hydrated so I can have the energy and focus each day and not just tap out early on. So if you want to stay in the hunt, you need a source of clean water, and that's what we're going to talk about today, ways to treat and filter water to make it safe to drink. Before we get into it, if you enjoy this podcast, please give it a 5-star rating on whatever platform you listen on and send an episode to a friend. It could be helpful to them and it will help the podcast grow. And as the podcast grows, we'll get more people outside and into hunting. Okay, so I want to start off with just a short story about treating water. Years ago, I had the opportunity to backpack along the Olympic Peninsula in Washington. It was really a cool trip. We did around 50 miles in 5 days, and it was just a gorgeous mix of sandy, open ocean beaches and dense, temperate rainforests. It was quite an incredible experience. The trail we took hugged the coastline pretty tight. We actually had to time our hiking so that we wouldn't get caught by the tide. At some points, there were rocks that we were hopping over, rock hopping in tide pools, basically. And then other days, we'd just be cruising on hard-packed sand right after the tide went out. One thing that surprised me about the trip was how hard it was to find water. We were hiking in the late summer, so I guess it makes sense. But in Western Washington, there's an abundance of running water year-round, and we were literally hiking along the edge of a rainforest. What happened, though, was that many of the streams we passed would be brackish because of the tide. And so while it seemed like we were surrounded by water, there wasn't any that we could drink. So one day we had filled up on water the night before at just a little trickle that was coming out of the bank flowing towards the ocean. And as we continued on our way the morning after, that trickle had dried up. By the afternoon or so, everybody was getting low on water, and we couldn't find any fresh water in the streams because they were all brackish. So we were getting a little worried. We weren't in dire shape yet, but we were thinking about if we could do a dry camp that night or if we would just need to keep going until we found some water. So we kept trekking along the beach, and finally I look towards the forest and see some vegetation that just looks a little different. It was green, the area seemed shaded, and there were some tall grasses or marshy plants, and I figured there might be some water over there. So we went over and checked it out, and sure enough, there was water. But it wasn't clean, clear, flowing water. It was more like a puddle with bugs swimming around in it and smelly mud and plants decomposing in it, and it was pretty shallow too. But it was water, and thankfully in that situation, we had a water filter. Often when I'm backpacking, I'm only bringing water treatment tablets because they're super lightweight, but tablets don't get any dirt or bugs or anything like that out of your water. So I was glad we had the filter to use. And after we pumped the water through it, it turned out fine. It didn't taste good, but it was drinkable and it didn't have a bunch of stuff floating in it. So that's a good setup or segue into our topic for today. There's so many different ways to treat water. Which way is the best? Let's go through them. One of the simplest ways to treat water when you're backpacking or hunting is to use tablets or drops. So tablets, some examples are potable aqua, which are iodine tablets, or aqua mira, which are chlorine dioxide drops. And they will come in just a small little jar or container. And basically there will be directions on the tablets or drops that say a certain number of tablets for a certain amount of water. So with potable aqua, it's something like 2 tablets for 1 liter of water, which is about your normal Nalgene. So you just take those tablets and you drop them in, and then you have to wait for a certain amount of time. And once you've waited for that amount of time, your water will be purified, or the things in it will be killed that could likely hurt you and give you indigestion. The same idea goes for aqua mira, the drops. It's just a certain ratio to a certain amount of water. You just drop them in and it's really convenient. It's great because you can just be going along, you can be hiking along, and then you come across a stream and you dip your water bottle into the stream. You put in the right amount of tablets or drops, and then you just put your water bottle back in your backpack and wait for the amount of time, and it's good to go. It's very low maintenance. Sometimes you have to pour some of the water over your threads just to make sure that you treat that as well. But once you've dropped them in there and just you leave them there, it's pretty much good to go. And it's really simple. It's not hard to do, and it's pretty convenient. The other thing is that the tablets and drops are very lightweight. They don't take much room in your pack, and having those there is just an easy way to have a backup source for clean water, or you can use it for your main source. And I've often, especially in places where I know I'm going to have relatively clean water already, like I'm going to be getting water from streams that are flowing and the water is going to be relatively clear already, often I'll just use those tablets even for a week at a time, and they work pretty well. So like we talked about, some of the advantages of these tablets are that they're just lightweight, they're small, they're easy to use. They can also be pretty inexpensive. You can get one little jar of those potable aqua tablets for about $8, and one jar of 50 tablets will treat 25 quarts of water. So for each trip, that's not a big expense, right? You just lump it in with your food costs and it's just not that much money. Now, the disadvantages of tablets are that, one, they don't taste that great. If you just put those in your water, say the potable aqua tablets, your water will start to taste like iodine, and it may take on sort of a yellowish sepia color as well. And it doesn't taste very good if you were to just drink that straight. Most of these purification tablets also come with some sort of neutralizer tablets. So with potable aqua, I'm just very familiar with potable aqua. That's what I've used for a long time. With potable aqua, you drop in your purifier or your treatment tablets, and then after 30 minutes, the treatment process is finished, and then you drop in some neutralizing tablets. And those do a pretty good job of bringing it back to a normal water taste and making it not icky at all. But you do have that extra step, and if you forget your neutralizer tablets or you run out or something like that, you'll still have this iodine tasting water, which isn't that great. Another disadvantage is that you have to wait up to 30 minutes for these. So unlike some of the other filtering or treatment systems With the tablets, you will have to wait before you can drink your water. And it's not that big of a deal if you have multiple water bottles and you are kind of cycling them between which ones you are treating. But if you're really thirsty, having to wait 30 minutes could be a real pain. Another disadvantage is that tablets use chemicals and they're not usually recommended for long-term use. So for a couple days, maybe even up to a week, that's fine. But these chemicals are not ideal for consumption. And so if you're concerned about that, tablets may not be the way for you to go. They're also not actually filtering anything. So if you drew water from a silty water source or something that had lots of things floating in it or bugs, you're not actually filtering any of that out. And you might want to incorporate a pre-filter with the tablets as well. But you could still have cloudy or muddy water. And though it would likely be safe to drink, it could still taste bad or just have these other components in it that aren't that enjoyable. And finally, tablets aren't effective against Cryptosporidium. Cryptosporidium is a microscopic protozoa parasite, and it gets in water from animal feces. And so if you drew from a water source that was tainted with animal feces, you could get Cryptosporidium. And tablets and Aquamira aren't effective against Cryptosporidium. I think with Aquamira, if you wait something like 4 hours, it can be effective. But realistically, in a practical situation, you're not going to wait that long, especially if the directions on the bottle tell you something like 30 minutes. So that's something to keep in mind. It may not be a big deal depending on what sort of water sources you're getting your water from. But if Cryptosporidium is an issue in the area that you're going out and hunting, you may want to take that into consideration. Another option you have for treating water is to use a filter. Filters physically strain out bacteria and protozoa, as well as anything else floating in your water. So if you want a cleaner final product, a filter is the way to go. You could get muddy water, and once you push it through that filter, it's going to be clean, and it will likely taste better as well. The actual filter component of a water filter is usually made from a material like ceramic or activated carbon. And there's all different types of filters. There are pump filters that have a little handle that you press repeatedly to pump water through the filter, or a little crank to push water through that filter. There are gravity-based filters, so something where you hang up a big bag of untreated water and then it flows down through the filter at the mouth of that bag, and then it flows into another bag or a water bottle, and that is clean water. You have squeeze filters. These will often be like a squeezable water bottle, and then at the top, there's the filter component. So you can scoop up water into your water bottle and then screw the cap on and then just squeeze it. And the squeezing creates pressure to push water through that filter. And then finally, there are straws. And these are just like they sound. You can crouch down by a water source or lay down by a water source and suck up water through the straw. It's kind of like a fat straw, and it has the filtering component inside of it. And you use just the force of your mouth, of your suction, to be able to suck water through that filter. And once it gets through, it is treated and clean. The great things about filters are that they actually filter out all the particles, right? And they often come with a pre-filter to get the bigger stuff. And that's nice because, again, you could have muddy water, you could have sources that are really stagnant and gross. And it's nice to not have anything floating around in there. Filters are also a great option for large groups of people, especially those gravity filters, because you can just scoop up a bunch of water in the bag that is used to initiate the filtering process. And then you could leave that in camp and just have that filter while you're doing other things, while you're cooking dinner, while you're getting ready for bed. And that's really nice to have. You just have a clean water source kind of on tap. A pump can be good too, because you can just pump as much water as you need right at the source. You just have to wait as long as it takes to pump, right? Filters also can last a pretty long time if you take good care of them. You will have to clean the actual filter component occasionally, but if you buy a good filter, it could last you for a very long time. Now, there are some disadvantages to filters. One is that when you're trying to transfer water from the water source to your water bottle, it can get a little tricky because you have to get it through the filter, right? So some filters will have a tube that you put in the water source and then you start pumping. Other ones, like I said, are gravity or squeeze activated. And so you have to go down and scoop a bunch of water. And just having that extra step in between the water and your water bottle gets a little tricky. I remember using a filter and trying to pump it from a very shallow, quick running water source. And there just wasn't a lot of water getting in the tube end that I put in the water. I was pumping a lot of air as well, which made the pumping mechanism less effective. And then out the other end, I'm trying to balance my water bottle on some rocks as I'm pumping, and the water bottle would fall over, and then I'm not pumping much water through the actual filter. So just depending on the setup, it can get a little complicated, and it's not as easy as some of the other water treatment methods where you can just treat the water in your water bottle or in your water container. Filters can also be relatively heavy compared to these other options. They have the whole filter component. They're often made of plastic. They may have a pump component, a pipe, and they can start to weigh a lot more than a SteriPen or tabs. So they're relatively heavy. They may be worth it to you depending on the water sources you are drawing water from and sort of how long the trip is, and maybe you have a big group. So it may be worth the extra weight, but it's not going to be the most lightweight option. It takes some time and manual work to force water through a filter. It's not going to take 30 minutes necessarily, but every time you get water, you're going to have to do some manual work, unless you have one of those gravity filters, right? That can be annoying. It's not a big deal, but it's something to think about. Like I mentioned, the actual filter component of the filter will need to be cleaned or even replaced periodically. And one thing that is interesting about filters is that filters don't kill viruses. So whereas tablets don't necessarily kill all the protozoa like Cryptosporidium, filters don't necessarily kill all viruses or filter out all viruses. And this usually shouldn't be a problem from US water sources, especially clean natural water resources. But if you were going to a different country, you may want to take a look at what viruses are present there and if they show up in water, because that could be an issue if you don't have the right water treatment system. And then finally, filters will cost you a little more upfront than tablets, although they may cost less than the next option that we're going to talk about, which is a SteriPen or a UV light water treatment. So a SteriPen is a little tool that is basically a handheld bulb. There's a handle and then there's a long, thin bulb, and the bulb emits UV light, and it's in a glass casing, right? So you can dip the bulb into your water bottle and it emits UV light, which treats the water. It actually doesn't kill the bacteria, protozoa, and viruses. It actually just damages their DNA and makes it so they can't reproduce. And that renders them harmless to humans. So it's an effective way of treating water and making it safe to drink. A SteriPen is one of the more expensive options on the list. They can often run you around $100, which is kind of surprising to me. I can't tell if that's anywhere close to what they would actually cost to make. It seems like just a UV light bulb, but that's how much they cost right now. And they are really quick and easy to use. You just scoop up water in your Nalgene, you put that SteriPen in, you agitate it for about a minute, and there are some lights on the tool to tell you how long you need to have that SteriPen in there. And there's also these little sensors on it that tell you if you have the SteriPen in the water deep enough. So it's really easy to use. It doesn't take that much time. It only takes maybe a minute for each sterilization, and then you can drink the water. The SteriPen is great for water from clear sources. It's kind of like tablets and drops, where if you have water that is pretty good already and you just need to make sure that it's not harboring any bacteria or protozoa in it, but it's clear, maybe it comes from a running source, a SteriPen is a good tool. If you're getting it from a gross water source, though, there's nothing to change the taste of the water, and potentially cloudy or silty water can reduce the effectiveness of a SteriPen because the light isn't getting to all of the water. So you either have to leave it in there for longer or you have to use a different tool. Another challenge with a SteriPen is that it takes batteries. So if you run out of batteries, your SteriPen is useless, and it's also pretty easy to break. It's got that exposed bulb. So if you drop it or are just too rough with it, your SteriPen could be useless. And that would be a real bummer if you're 3 days into a 5-day hunting trip and very far from civilization. You then would have to figure out a different way to purify your water, and hopefully you have a backup. And finally, a SteriPen, while it is pretty quick for one bottle of water, if you're trying to treat large quantities of water, you can only treat a certain amount at a time. Usually it's like up to 2 liters. So if you had a big water container or you were trying to treat water for an entire group of people, it could be frustrating because then you would have to portion out all of that water into 1 or 2 liters at a time and then wait for 60 seconds to treat it and then move on to the next 1 to 2 liters. Whereas if you had a big water container and you were using a filter, you could just keep filtering until all the water was treated. So that is a little bit frustrating. I've tried to do that before with large quantities of water. It's not the end of the world, but it's a little bit frustrating, and sometimes it would be nicer to just be able to drop in some tablets or filter the water until it was all treated. The final way to treat water is by boiling. This is maybe the oldest method. It's the most basic method. It's just simple and reliable. You may have heard different things with boiling, but the rule of thumb is 1 minute at a rolling boil will make water safe to drink. And if you're above around 5,000 feet in elevation, you want to boil the water for 3 minutes because boiling water has a lower temperature at higher elevations. So you just need to boil it a little bit longer to make sure that it's safe to drink. So where does boiling water stack up against the other water treatment systems? Well, again, like anything that's not filtered, you could have muddy water and boil it and it could be safe to drink, but it's still going to be muddy. It may not taste good. It may not look good. There could be things floating around in there. So you may want to think about incorporating a pre-filter, even if you're going to boil water. The nice thing is that it's pretty much a fail-safe method. As long as you can boil water, it's there. So if you're out on a trip and your filter or your SteriPen fails, you can still boil water and get yourself out of a potentially bad situation. Boiling water is great for melting snow. If you're melting snow as one of your main water sources, it's not that much more effort to go ahead and boil it. Now, it will take a long time. Boiling water in general just takes a long time. Even with a jet boil or something like that, it's going to take a while because a lot of those really fast jet boil type stoves have a very small capacity. And of course, if boiling water is your main water treatment method, it's going to require extra fuel. So that's a little bit extra weight, it's a little bit extra cost, and it's just something you'll have to factor in if you're deciding to use boiling water as your main treatment method. I think most people would choose a different treatment method as their primary method, but then have boiling water as a backup. But sometimes you are cooking and you have some untreated water and you don't want to go through the time of treating it or don't want to use your resources. So you just use untreated water. You're cooking anyway, so you boil it and then you're good to go. Or, like I said, if you're melting snow, if you are maybe on a spring bear trip and you're high up in the mountains and you're near the snow line, you might be melting a lot of snow for water. Or if you're on a trip where it's all snowy, you might be using snow for water. Then boiling might be a good option because it's kind of all in the same place and it doesn't take that much more effort. All right, guys. Well, I hope this was helpful for you. There's lots of good options out there. It really comes down to personal preference and the needs of your specific trip. Are you prioritizing water just for yourself, or are you going to be in a group? Do you need to melt snow as a main water source? How fast do you need your water? These are all questions you might consider when choosing a treatment option. I want to talk about melting snow again for a second because I think it's applicable to spring bear hunting, which is one of the main seasons coming up. So if you're thinking about hunting bears this spring, you definitely want to consider your water systems. And depending on when you go, you might be relying on snow for your water, especially when you're climbing up high to get a good glassing vantage. So you'll need to melt a lot of snow to fill up one water bottle, and it takes a lot of time. It's a good idea to think ahead and bring a more powerful stove and a bigger pot so you can collect and melt more water at a time. You can also set up passive melting systems. So one way is to take a big black trash bag and fill it with snow, and then you tie it in a tree and you leave it in the sun. Then the snow in the trash bag will start to melt, and you can cut a corner of the trash bag and let it drip into a water bottle. You can also do a similar thing with a pillowcase where you fill it with snow, hang it by the fire, and then put a water bottle underneath a corner of it to catch dripping snow. And so you might just consider these other options to make that process of melting snow a little bit easier for yourself. You could even consider just bringing additional water bladders that you fill with snow, and then you lay them in the sun to melt. There's all these different options, right? You just need to think ahead and not get caught trying to melt liters of snow over a pocket rocket with a 16-ounce pot. It's just not going to go well. I can tell you from experience, trying to melt snow gets very discouraging because you collect tons of snow. Maybe you had to walk 3/4 of a mile to get it. You fill up all your water bottles with snow, and then you come back and you start trying to melt it down. And it's taking forever over your tiny stove. And then once it does start to melt, all of that snow seems to just disappear into a tiny amount of water. So if you're going to rely on snow, make sure you have the resources you need to do it efficiently and get enough water. I've started just bringing a couple extra gallons of water with me in my truck. This is nice because I can start out on my hunt hydrated, and I know that at any time, if I'm heading back to the truck, I can get water. So if I'm packing an animal out, or I just can't find water when I expect to, my truck is kind of like a home base where I can go if I need to. So I thought I would just add that in. I know it's not exactly water treatment, but I think it might be helpful for planning your spring bear hunting trip this season. I think that wraps it up for today. Get your water strategy down, stay hydrated, and I'll catch you next week.